Good evening, I'm Klaudia Czerwińska and you're watching World News Tonight live from Warsaw. We agree with the proposal to cease hostilities, but it should lead to enduring peace and remove the underlying causes of this crisis, said Vladimir Putin regarding the U.S.-backed ceasefire plan for Ukraine. This comment comes as U.S. delegation made it to Moscow to meet with the Russian president. More on the latest dynamic developments in just a moment, but first, tonight's headlines. President Duda suggests U.S. nuclear warhead deployment to Poland. Brussels announces a €4.7 billion initiative to boost South Africa's economy. Donald Trump says Greenland's annexation is likely to happen. During a press conference held by the Kremlin, Vladimir Putin signaled readiness to agree to a ceasefire, but only if it leads to lasting peace. The Russian president is also set to hold a meeting with U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, who arrived in Moscow early on Thursday. But an important conversation was also held in Washington as the NATO Secretary General met face-to-face with President Trump. Our chief political correspondent, Aaron Damon, traced the events of today and has the latest on the story.
All eyes on Vladimir Putin.
We agree with the proposals to cease hostilities, but we proceed from the fact that this cessation should be such that it would lead to long-term peace and would eliminate the original causes of this crisis.
As he leaves the door open to a proposed 30-day ceasefire in Ukraine on his terms.
I think that we need to talk about this with our American colleagues, call President Trump, discuss it together.
Donald Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff raced to Moscow on Thursday to convince the Russian leader that it's time to wave the white flag. But Witkoff was not the hottest ticket in town, with Belarusian President and Putin ally Alexander Lukashenko first to get FaceTime at the Kremlin. Witkoff and Putin are expected to meet over the coming hours. Over in Washington, the shoulder-rubbing continued. President Trump joined by NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte in the Oval Office.
Well, we'd like to see a ceasefire from Russia, and we have not been working in the dark. We've been discussing with Ukraine land and pieces of land that would be kept and lost and all of the other elements of a final agreement. A lot of the details of a final agreement have actually been discussed. Now we're going to see whether or not Russia's there, and if they're not, it'll be a very disappointing moment for the world.
Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski earlier underlined the telltale signs of Russia's next steps.
The joint US-Ukrainian statement from Jeddah has presented a test for the Russian Federation. Ukraine has agreed to a 30-day ceasefire with a goal of reaching a peace agreement. If Russia rejects this test, if it fails, it will be clear who wants peace and who wants war.
One expert responding as the news broke on Thursday told TVP World Vladimir Putin is playing straight out of his own playbook.
I think it's nothing new what Vladimir Putin said. This is an old Russian strategy. He said he overall agree, but and I think what could have been expected, Russia pursues a maximalist agenda.
So will the White House welcome Putin's response or read it as rejection? Only time will tell. Aaron Darman, TVP World.
And as the world holds its breath in anticipation, waiting for new updates on the Russia-Ukraine ceasefire, Ukraine continues the fight against its aggressor. For the latest on the situation on the front lines and updates on the developments in the Kursk region, I'm joined live by our Ukraine correspondent, Oz Chatterjee. Good evening, Oz. So what are the latest updates on the situation on the front line, especially in light of the latest developments?
Well, the Ukrainian government still hasn't commented officially on the situation that's been unfolding in Kursk with regards to the loss of Sudzha, which the Russian government is claiming that they have captured Sudzha, the town that Ukraine captured in August 2024, location of that famous gas metering station used to transfer Russian gas into Europe via Ukraine. Now, the Russians are claiming they saw it. We saw a video of them on Wednesday in the center of Suja in the town. Visual confirmation that they were indeed in that part of it, but still no definitive response from Ukraine about it. We heard from President Zelenskyy on Wednesday referring to a sort of tactical withdrawal that the Ukrainians were making, that has been acknowledged by the Ukrainians, but no definitive understanding of where they've withdrawn to. They are still said to be in parts of Kursk, but Russia's definitely still trying to drive the Ukrainians out before any kind of discussions. In fact, Putin specifically said that, saying it's not clear how the situation will develop in Kursk with regards to a ceasefire. It's clear that any kind of negotiations that Putin is considering do not include Kursk. And it must be said, this was a significant political chip in Ukraine's hand. And now they no longer have that for any negotiations with the Russians to try and trade this land back. If they are pushed fully out of it, it will be a significant political blow to Ukraine, who are hoping to use this in any kinds of negotiations. We heard from Donald Trump talking about land that Ukraine is expected to lose in his eyes. The Ukrainians might not see it the same way, but the situation was going to be different if they went into those negotiations with Kursk. Now that situation has been massively threatened. It must be said the Russians have taken significant losses over the last few weeks, particularly bringing in North Korean troops to try and help them push Ukraine's supply lines and force these withdrawals from the Ukrainians. It now is looking very likely that the Ukrainians will withdraw from Kursk to preserve the lives of their soldiers, but they will no longer have that political chip in their arsenal.
Thank you so much. That was Oz Karadji reporting live from Kyiv. Polish President Andrzej Duda suggested that the U.S. should consider deploying nuclear warheads to Poland as means of protection for NATO's eastern flank, even though the U.S. has never made similar offers. Meanwhile, France is willing to extend its nuclear umbrella to Poland, as developing its own nuclear arsenal would take decades. Our defense correspondent Marek Steele has this report.
Could U.S. nuclear weapons be deployed to Poland? The Polish president proposed the idea in an interview for the Financial Times.
The borders of NATO moved east in 1999, so 26 years later, there should also be a shift of the NATO infrastructure east. Russia did not even hesitate when relocating their nuclear weapons to Belarus.
But so far, the United States has not offered to move any of its nuclear weapons to Poland.
When I'm going to Poland.
A request by Warsaw from 2022 to extend the U.S. nuclear sharing program to Poland was rejected by the Biden administration.
These kinds of issues are better handled in discretion and not through press interviews, but the damage from this will not be significant. I appreciate President Duda's efforts, as I am convinced that only goodwill and the desire to strengthen Polish security guided the president. On the other hand, are such methods effective? I have my opinion here.
Poland hosts Allied soldiers on its soil, and last year the first U.S. permanent military installation, a missile base, reached operability. Nuclear weapons would naturally be another level of deterrence for Warsaw. The question now is how to get them. France has proposed to extend its nuclear umbrella to its European allies, including Poland.
Yesterday, I spoke to my French counterpart. We have a declaration from last week from President Macron about the extension of the French nuclear umbrella. We are taking a serious approach to this issue.
Europe has 3 nuclear weapon states: Russia, the United Kingdom, and France. But several European nations are part of the U.S. nuclear sharing program: the Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, Italy, and Turkey. Russia deployed nuclear weapons to Belarus in 2023.
Something that was painstakingly avoided after NATO enlargement in 1999 and 2004, Eastern enlargement, simply in order to appease Russia still at the time. But today, I mean, there are probably good reasons to think about the deployment of nuclear weapons, if only to actually strengthen transatlantic security guarantees.
Another option for Poland would be to develop its own nuclear weapon, but President Duda admitted that would take decades, while deployment also requires extensive preparation.
Poland would need to train some of its air force and land forces to particularly handle this kind of situation. So it is really a huge ambition, and it's clear that at the political level, Poland is ready.
Poland, a frontline NATO country, is preparing for the possibility of a Russian invasion. Last week, Donald Tusk announced the Polish military is planning to reach 500,000 soldiers, including reserves.
We will use every available opportunity to strengthen our defense. We will not look at anyone. We will not fear anyone's criticism. Anything that will enhance Poland's defense will be implemented and used by us.
On Wednesday, the European Parliament labeled Poland's and the Baltics border reinforcement projects as flagship EU defense tasks.
Thursday marks the beginning of a debate on the future of a €500 billion German fund meant to bolster defense spending. Germany's prospective Chancellor Friedrich Merz is trying to use the time he's got left to convince the outgoing lower house of the Bundestag to vote in favor of the constitutional changes to borrowing rules. John Todd reports.
All eyes on Germany's man of the moment, Friedrich Merz, ahead of a special parliamentary session, preparing to roll the dice in a high-stakes gamble. As he pushed for big changes to borrowing rules and approval for a €500 billion fund to revive growth and boost military spending, Merz said these changes would help Germany play an international role.
Germany must become capable of defense, and Germany must return to the international stage as an effective partner in Europe, in NATO and in the world.
After coming first in last month's snap election, the politician seen as Germany's prospective chancellor is under pressure. His CDU Conservatives and the SPD potential coalition partners want to secure the funds before a new parliament convenes on March 25th, where his plan risks being blocked by far-right and far-left politicians. He needs the Greens' support for the two-thirds majority required to change the constitution, and despite concessions, they've been holding out.
You made a proposal for an amendment to the Constitution that did not include climate protection. That's sad enough, really.
The prospective massive defence spending by the EU in the wake of America's reduced military focus on Europe, and now Germany opening the taps on investment, has seen shares in Rheinmetall, one of Europe's leading arms manufacturers, rocket 69% over the past month. Experts say reforming spending would allow the government to invest in defence and benefit German citizens.
In order to sell more public spending in terms of Ukraine or defence to the public, I mean, you also have to make sure that they see that kind of the German government is not only spending money on foreign and security policy, but also has an eye on what is happening in Germany. And I mean, some bridges are crumbling. Like the infrastructure is not in the best shape, schools and so on. So there's a lot of stuff to be improved.
Analysts say Merz could prove a bold leader for Germany as America focuses its attention away from Europe.
I think he's really trying to kind of live up to the role. I mean, many people in Europe expect from Germany, given that a lot of people have been disappointed by Olaf Scholz, the outgoing chancellor.
Failure to reach a deal could cripple coalition talks now underway. With few other viable options, it could even spell another snap election. This is John Todd for TVP World.
And now it's time for us to go back to our Ukraine correspondent Oz Kataji, who reports live from Kyiv. As we have the latest developments, we have breaking news. We've heard from Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, who took to Telegram to give his response to today's press conference. Oz, what can you tell us?
Yes, President Zelenskyy released a statement while we've been on air, saying now we have all heard from Russia very predictable, very manipulative words from Putin in response to the idea of silence on the front. He is actually preparing a refusal as of now. Putin, of course, is afraid to tell Trump directly that he wants to continue this war, wants to kill Ukrainians. And that is why they are there in Moscow, are setting the idea of silence with such preconditions that nothing will work out at all, or that it will not work out for as long as possible. President Zelenskyy went on to encourage the Americans to continue pressuring the Russians on this and saying that they are willing to come to the table with no preconditions when it comes to the ceasefire. It's very clear the Ukrainians are not accepting at face value Putin's words today. Breaking development. We'll continue to bring you more on this as it happens on TVP World. Back to you in the studio.
Thank you so much, Oz. Please keep us updated. This is a very dynamic situation. Preparing a refusal. Those are the words of President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Thank you for joining us. The Global Gateway Investment Package. This is the name of the initiative aimed at investing over €4.7 billion in South Africa to boost its economy. In light of the U.S. cutting all funding to South Africa and the EU dealing with additional tariffs imposed by the Trump administration, Brussels and Johannesburg are joining ranks. Paweł Trzaskowski has this report.
€4.7 billion. This is how much the European Union wants to invest in South Africa. The initiative is to boost the African country's economy and help it, among other goals, transition to cleaner energy. But in a broader context, it is also to tighten bonds between South Africa and the European bloc.
But we are also sharing fundamental interests from ensuring peace and stability on our continents to boosting sustainable economic growth and strengthening our supply chains.
South Africa and the EU have been joined in a strategic partnership since 2007. However, the last summit was held as late as 7 years ago. But now, as the US cuts all funding to South Africa and is imposing additional tariffs on the EU, Johannesburg and Brussels are closing ranks.
If there ever was a time when it is absolutely necessary for partners who share the same values to work together, this is the time.
With close to €50 billion worth of trade in 2023, South Africa is the EU's largest trading partner in sub-Saharan Africa. However, the EU is not alone reaching out to Africa. Russia has been winning some African countries over for several years now by conducting disinformation operations or maintaining the presence of Wagner Group mercenaries in countries like Sudan, Libya and Mali. Moreover, with the US limiting its operations on the continent, this Russian influence might grow even further.
United States has cut the USA aid to Africa and created a vacuum which I am sure will be implemented by Russians.
However, according to Jan Wielinski, former Polish ambassador to Zimbabwe and Malawi, there are countries other than South Africa where Europe could look for potential partners.
The countries which are at the south and who are members of SADC community, like Namibia, like Swazi, Mozambique, they are also under influence of Russian propaganda, but looking upon the South Africa, they are trying to moderate their position.
And this week's summit in Johannesburg is Europe's first solid foothold in Africa in many years. But more are reported to come. Another meeting of European and South African leaders is already planned to be held for this year.
I think annexation of Greenland will happen. We are going to have to make a deal on Greenland, said Donald Trump. These words will most definitely prompt a strong reaction from Nuuk and Copenhagen, as both have openly rejected Trump's suggestions. Our reporter, Sonia Gatabishchan, was in Greenland's capital, where she checked what the feelings are following the latest elections in Greenland.
Initial reactions to Greenland's parliamentary elections are emerging. Christine Hildel, a local journalist, summed up the landscape for us.
Parties that used to be small and not being in a coalition, they are now the biggest parties. So the small people are tired of the big parties.
And although the two parties may have provoked similar feelings in voters in Greenland, a self-governing territory of Denmark, they're on the opposite sides of the spectrum. Demokratiet, the winning party, is hoping for a slower transition to independence, whereas Naleraq, that came in second, is planning to cut ties with Denmark more quickly, considering their relationship somewhat poor.
Well, it's been bad for many years. They took our land without referendum. We want it back. So we want to be Greenlanders. We don't want to be Danish.
Since no party won majority of the 31 parliamentary seats, this is the backdrop of the upcoming coalition talks. And Naleraq's history does not inspire confidence for that setup.
Naleraq has left the coalition some years ago, and I think it was 2 or 3 years ago they were just kicked out. So there's a narrative about them being a opposition party, being a party are on the side.
Add to that more uncertainty stemming from President Donald Trump's interest in Greenland, and this becomes the post-election hope.
That we don't get invaded. But yeah, it's a real threat, and we see it, seeing that Trump, he's not joking, so I think it's very important to show that we are one people.
5 out of 6 parties on the ballot criticized Donald Trump's aspirations surrounding Greenland, with the leader of the winning party adding that he hopes this election sends President Donald Trump a message that Greenland is not for sale. From Nuuk, for TVP World, Sonja Gatovic.
A day of significant meetings and big statements. Vladimir Putin signaled Russia's readiness to agree to a US-backed ceasefire, while Donald Trump said that Greenland's annexation is likely to happen. Joining me now to discuss the latest is TVP World's Europe editor Marcin Zaborowski. Marcin, thank you for joining me. There's
of course
definitely a lot happening. We just heard from Oz Chatterjee with the latest. Yeah. But let's start from the beginning. What happened in the Kremlin today, and what's the latest? How are we supposed to understand what happened?
Well, what we heard today from the Russians was something which looked like, an agreement caveated by the conditions, which suggested that it was actually a disagreement. Yeah? So, in reality, what President Putin said, it was yes to the ceasefire agreement, but then conditioned it in the way which makes it impossible for the Ukrainian side to accept. And these conditions include the cessation of the delivery of aid to Ukraine, military aid, the cessation of any kind of training, as well as promise not to mobilize. So in reality, that means, and pardon my French, but a kind of a castration of the Ukrainian defense efforts.
It seems like a very skilled manipulation tactic to use, to say yes, but actually trace it back and take it back to.
That's exactly what it is.
No.
That's exactly what it is. I mean, it's just like the language may seem promising for the American interlocutors because it says yes, I like this this proposal. I think it's great. I think it's correct. These are the exact words that Putin used to please President Trump. He knows that President Trump very well responds to flattery. So, and he told him, your proposal is fantastic. But then he said, we need to eliminate all the root causes of this conflict to be here at the first place. And in Putin's words, the root causes is actually Ukrainian independence and the existence of Ukraine as an independent state. And then he talks about the specific instruments, meaning, the cessation of delivery of aid.
I would like to bring some of the headlines that came after the press conference that we've heard take place at the Kremlin. Putin, we agree to stop fighting in Ukraine, but it should lead to long-standing peace. These words come from a man who started this whole conflict. How should we read into this? What's happening next? What's in the cards?
Well, I think what we have in the cards now is the situation in which everybody wants to please the Americans, right? I mean, really, Trump holds the cards. That's the situation that we have. We had this disagreement in the White House between Ukrainians and the Americans. Not a very great episode in the Ukrainian diplomatic history. And following that, the Ukrainians managed to turn the situation around because they agreed to immediate ceasefire on the condition that the military aid will continue to flow to Ukraine. And as we know, it stopped flowing. I mean, everybody in Poland, in Rzeszów hub reported that actually the delivery of aid did stop. Yeah. So Ukrainians managed to turn it around. The aid began to flow again. And then now Putin is saying, I like this ceasefire, but let's no aid, no military for Ukraine.
It's interesting when you said that it's everyone's trying to please the Americans and Mr. Trump is holding all the cards, because this is exactly what he actually mentioned only but some time ago when it comes to Russia, that it's Russia that holds all the cards. So that's an interesting way to put it. Another one, we will, this comes from Mr. Putin as well, we will agree next steps of the conflict taking into account developments on the front. In light of what's happening on the front lines, especially in the Kursk region, what we've heard from Oz Katerji, why do you think he's saying that? What does he mean by the developments in the Kursk region? Because we know that Ukrainians might actually fully withdraw.
Well, he wants to sell to his population the image of the reconquering of a piece of the Russian territory. He wants to say to the world that Russia retook what he lost, and he also wants to say that this is where the Ukrainians are threatening us. Ukrainians are this aggressive, threatening power. So he wants to project the world this image that he is not the one to start the war. He is defending Mother Russia against Ukrainian fascists.
Let's jump into another one of those excerpts that we had from Mr. Putin. If U.S. and Russia agree on energy cooperation, then gas pipeline for Europe could be provided. How do you interpret these words, and what could they potentially mean for Europe?
We had some kind of unclarity about what exactly these words meant, what exactly was being said, and
there was definitely a discussion in the news.
How exactly it was being translated. So the understanding is that, if I understand correctly, that Lukashenko suggested that the West is now in a difficult situation. And then President Putin said, difficult situation means a pipe. Yeah? And then
so it's a play on words.
Yes, and then President Putin said, "Oh yes, and pipe. Yes, let's come back to the pipe and pipeline. And yes, if everything goes well, then we can institute the resumption of the deliveries of gas to Western Europe."
Do you think that Europe would be likely to actually take him up on that offer?
I certainly hope that no. But many times in the past we had a situation that some European business interests are very eager to go back to business as usual with Russia.
Well, as we look at this whole situation, we also heard from President Zelenskyy. We've had breaking news coming from Oz in Kyiv. And one of the things that really stuck with me was this preparing for a refusal. Vladimir Putin is preparing for a refusal, and that was on Ukraine's President Zelenskyy's Telegram account. Do you think that Mr. Trump is actually going to listen to President Zelenskyy and take his advice on what's been said today in Moscow?
I'm not so sure. Yeah, I'm not so sure because President Trump wants quick wins. The actions in the last couple of days look like that he might be pocketing some kind of a win. And Ukrainian president telling him in public that what may look like a win to you is actually not a win is a way of exercising a pressure on President Trump to change his tactic. And he wouldn't like it. I don't think he will respond well to that. So it's a shame that that wasn't communicated in private, that it was done as publicly as it has been done. Judging by at least the recent appearances and statements by President Trump, he does not like to be seen as a man acting under pressure. He wants to be seen.
He does not like to be cornered.
Exactly, and that's we see here an element of Ukrainian side trying to retake initiative and tell him this is not a win. You should not take it.
Definitely. There is a lot of pressure going on, a lot of emotions, obviously, and it's easy to understand where such statements are coming from.
Absolutely.
And I think this is something that we are definitely going to take a closer look at over the coming hours in our services. Marcin Zaborowski, thank you so much for joining me in the studio and breaking this down for our viewers. It was great to have you in the studio.
Thank you.
And so this would mark the end of World News Tonight, but please do stay tuned because we have Adam Yasers on the record coming up in just a moment, so stay tuned.